to segment 6.8, Strategies for Startups. I'm on page 273 of the textbook. This was an interesting case study because you saw a little bit of the idea of David versus Goliath here, of a small inventor going after a large corporation and really attracting their interest. Jim Fraser actually came up with a new camera lens type system. Now the first question I have there is, what if Mr. Attenborough, he was the inventor. Actually, I got my names mixed up there. It should be, what if Mr. Fraser has shown the details of his invention to Panavision prior to having a contract in place regarding IP rights? And so as far as if he did not already have something on file relating to that, the reality is that a large corporation could have theoretically taken Mr. Fraser's ideas and not compensated him for it. Now, I'm not saying that companies will do this in a malicious type manner, but sometimes if you talk to somebody and you put an idea into their head, that idea sparks another idea, which sparks another idea. And you can go back to your team and say, hey, this third idea I have, go ahead and pursue it, which in all reality may have stemmed from an idea that you heard from somewhere else. So we are all influenced by what it is that we hear. And the reality is that for Mr. Fraser, if he did not already have IP rights in place prior to actually discussing with Panavision, what could have occurred is he could have discussed his idea and he could have potentially lost it. Or let's assume that there was an NDA in place and Panavision decided to proceed forward with that invention without compensating Mr. Fraser. He would then have a contract dispute as to whether or not an NDA was violated. It's much easier to just have some IP rights in place that you can rely on. It's a government stamped proof that shows what it is that you invented on such and such date. So having that in place allows him to then go ahead and talk to large corporations without fearing that they may potentially take his idea or invention. Second one is having secured patent rights. What benefit, again, did Mr. Fraser receive? And we see that on page 275, it talks about that when Panavision rents them out, a percentage of the rentals goes to Mantis. Now, Mantis was Fraser's film company. So in short, he was able to continue, he received a royalty. So for every time that they had some type of a sale or rental, part of that proceed went back to Mr. Fraser. So that was a very good licensing type setup that he had. Now the question is, why was the patent invalidated? And you see that again on page 275. The reason why I have that question in there is because I want to bring your attention to the fact that things like this do occur. And what I mean is that if, for example, the application requirements require the applicant to be very forthcoming, upright with the office. And in this case, what they found was that the video that had been created and presented to the patent office to show the invention itself was in fact created on a different lens. And so the litigation court later on determined that was a misrepresentation. That if they were indicating that this is how it is the lens would work, and one would make the conclusion that they were actually using the lens when they were doing that video, then that would be construed potentially as a misrepresentation. And misrepresentation is not something that you want to happen during the patent application process, because as you see in that example, it can be the basis to invalidate your patent, which is not a very good outcome. So there is an ethical duty of candor with the office, that you are being very upright and disclosing to them information that comes your way. There's also part of that duty of candor is to not misrepresent any information that comes your way. So with my clients, I often tell them that any prior art that they come across that is relevant to their application, that they are under an ethical duty to actually disclose it to me so I can disclose it to the patent office as well. So ethical violation in relation to getting a patent can be grounds to invalidate a patent. Now let's look at the slides. Strategies for startups. When we look at the life cycle for each of these companies, we will be analyzing it with the perspective of what we just completed, namely with respect to strategies, with respect to management, and last but not least, with respect to timing. So the first one here is, why should we even get IP if you're a small type startup? One, you may want to protect your assets by asserting them against competitors. Two, you may want to protect them in the marketplace before it is the other companies actually invent it. And three, you may want to make money through licensing. Now, these are three common reasons why does a lot of people say you should get IP as a startup. And I would indicate all three of these reasons are not a good idea for a startup. First off, with respect to asserting patents, you don't have any money to assert. The Wright brothers, the case that we looked at before, was very much an exception. But the reality is that for most startups, they don't have $1 million, $2 million, $3 million in the bank ready for them to just proceed forward and actually start litigating. So that option is usually not on the table. Second is, if you want to protect your market space, you can do it for a much cheaper price by simply writing a blog post. In fact, you could just go online, write a blog post, what the invention is, and that effectively would have stopped other competitors from coming into this space and actually trying to occupy it, because that blog post will now serve as prior art against any of your competitors' inventions that are then filed. Last but not least, make money through licensing. Well, the reality is that you don't have a lot of leveraging potential as a startup right now. You don't have deep pockets, you really can't threaten them, you don't have a very large portfolio, so usually as far as your leveraging potential, it's not the best. So what I indicate is that if you are trying from the startup's point of view, you should focus on, one, protecting the core assets in a very narrow manner, and then setting things in place so that you can keep those assets alive in a very cost-efficient manner. So what does that actually mean? It means that you might have one, rather than spreading out 10 different filings of patent applications, each of those may be $5,000 to $10,000 each, you bundle them all together into one application. Now, for basis of our discussion, I'm assuming that all these inventions are related enough that they can be bundled. You just can't take completely different inventions and bundle them. They need to be related in some manner. And generally for startups, more often than not, they are related because it relates to the same technology that they are pursuing. So you can file one application just focusing on the one aspect of, one application that includes multiple type ideas of this invention itself. So that keeps costs down. Rather than paying, $50,000, you may pay $10,000 to $15,000 for a very robust specification. And then as time goes on, that one may come up for issuance, you can file a continuation, and you go through that process. So rather than trying to maintain 10 different applications, you're just maintaining one. Much more cost efficient, much more cost effective. Another similar type idea is that you can have, you can file very robust provisional applications. Each of those would cost $65 each, not including fees for attorneys. That would be just government fees for a for a micro entity. For a small entity, it would be in the range of $130. So, but in short, you can file, let's say, 10 different provisionals, and then after a year, file one non-provisional that claims priority to all those provisionals. Again, making the assumption that they all can be connected in some manner. And if that's the case, then again, you're only maintaining one application as opposed to 10, which keeps costs down for startups while still maximizing the doors for opportunity in the future. As far as increasing the leverage of a startup, one, IP can increase the valuation of the company, and that's with respect to valuations of investments and things of that nature. And so it may increase your chances of actually being acquired. Many companies nowadays, when they acquire, they're interested as to what patents and IP they are bringing with them, which may in essence sweeten the deal or may be the sole basis for the deal. As far as improving defenses against competition, the reality that I indicate to startups is that you have to know if you're a startup nowadays going into a space, more often than not, you will be infringing other patents. There are so many patents out there. If your goal in life is to not infringe a patent, I can assure you that you will likely not achieve that. So the question is, if you can't avoid infringement of some patents, what can you do to actually use your IP in a manner that mitigates some of that risk? So as a startup, you don't have deep pockets. So there's much smaller risk that you will be sued. Secondly, you can position the company against potential competitors that come out, and you could do that by deterring patent litigation. So they would be under the same onus that you would be, namely that in order to pursue litigation against you, they may have to go ahead and actually fight, but that costs money. So your competitor may be in the same financial situation as you, but if you have patent assets, if they come against you, you can then leverage it against your competitor, assuming that there's some applicability there. So it allows you to more in a cross-competition framework to lower the bar such that both teams are now competing on the same level. Patents would definitely allow you to do that. As far as deferring patent trolls, generally speaking, they don't go after startups because, again, they are not deep pockets. The second is, I say it, that it doesn't deter competition, but as I indicated, you can lower that negotiation bar such that your leveraging potential is a little bit higher just by being in a position where you can not necessarily assert in a litigation sense, but assert as a cross-licensing should, for example, another company approach you. Now, some startup investment perspectives. Some indicate, okay, if I invest $30,000, I might get $1 to $1.5 million in return. And this was actually based off of a statistical analysis in the range of about 5 years ago. So 2019 right now, so 2013-14 timeframe, there was analysis done that said for every 30,000 you throw into a startup, there's a high chance that you might get $1 million to $1.5 million back in return. So it's a very good return on your investment. Now, that average return is based off of patent sales that were going on, 5+ years ago. It assumes that you are first in the field, and assumes that the patents themselves are in good shape, meaning that they were prosecuted well, they were written well, things of that nature. If you really cut corners and do not take things seriously there, then obviously the value will not be as much. So how do you manage? As far as startups are concerned, we have the ABCDs here. The reality is that startups really don't have much to aggregate because usually there isn't anything. So what you're doing in a startup phase is focusing a lot on building organization structure so that you can carefully track, so you can carefully organize, assess the value of with respect to the company and with respect to the market. As far as confirming IP matters, it's good to just get into a general policy of being able to make sure that your ownership is clear right from the get-go. In fact, with startups, usually there's a little issue as to who it is that the IP is being licensed to. Startups that are in very early stage, often the IP will be licensed directly to the inventors. And then there may be a transition where now the LLC or the INC is set up. And from thereafter, all the IP will be owned by that specific entity. And so you may need to actually transfer some of the rights, but usually that doesn't necessarily occur. The last one would be developing IP policies and strategies, and that's where you would make sure that you have a policy in place for NDAs, employment type agreements, as well as incentives. So for startups, they want to incentivize their employees so that they are continuing as much as possible actually generating new inventions for the company. As far as when do you invest as far as timing, the GPS type analysis, for startups it will be all about generating. So startups will almost focus exclusively on the generating phase when they are starting out. Now the one exception to this would be, for example, if you have a company that actually does have some potential, let's say, financial backing or alpha type angel investor funds, and they may actually go out and acquire some patents. And that acquisition may take them from being a company with no patents to suddenly a company with 10 to 20 patents. So I have seen some companies that actually do that, and that propels them into this space very quickly so that they can actually be potentially positioning themselves much earlier than a typical startup. So the January phase would include provisionals, non-provisionals. They likely would not be focusing too much on international because that costs a lot of money. So positioning themselves, again, generally speaking, they would not be making much time and attention on that because they really are not at that stage yet securing. There's no patents yet to secure. An example here is a company called Lytro. You may have heard of them. And they have an ability to, after capture, modify the specific point in the picture that is in focus. So you can see on the left-hand side, the two pictures of the cats. On the left-hand image, the foreground cat is in focus. On the one on the right-hand side is the background cat that is in focus. And similar type thing with the two images on the right-hand side, where you have the scuba tank and the actual scuba diver. And that ability to actually control what is in focus is something that they were able to do based off of a new type of camera that they have. So this was created back in 2006 timeframe, and when they went ahead and pursued IP protection, they had a number of patent assets. So I indicate to them that there were 20 patent applications assigned to them, and in addition to that, there were 28 patents and applications that were assigned from them. Now, what does that actually mean? That means that 20 are actually owned by the company, and 28 the rights to those are actually being allocated to others. And let's talk about, for example, a security lien or a bank lien, where another third party is going in and saying, I'll fund your company, but I need a lien on your patent assets, which means that should the company fail, they would be able to exercise the lien so that they can then have some compensation for whatever investment they put into the company. So Lytro ended up having over $90 million in investment. Was it directly related to the applications and patents that were assigned from them? I don't know. But from me on the background looking in at the numbers, I can't help but think that some of that investment amount came from the fact that there were some liens that were provided to give some confidence in the company. As far as the benefits of IP, it really showed the investors that there was a viability of their idea, that there was a prestige of recognition of having this very new type invention out there. And the collateral, as I presume is going on here, can be transferred to venture capitalists, which again can increase their confidence so they feel that if should anything happen to the company where they are not able to get that money back, they at least would have the patent assets that they could then use to potentially start some assertion campaign and go after other companies that may be using that IP.